Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar all about mastering mistakes in Sage 50 Payroll. My name's Duncan, I'm your host and presenter, and I am joined by my colleague Laura, who's standing by in the background ready to answer questions. Now before we get started, I'll run through a quick bit of housekeeping just to explain how everything works. So on the current slide you'll see the controls found towards the right hand side of your browser window. The icon at the top, the microphone crossed out, is just to indicate that if you have a microphone, it is muted automatically for participating in this call, and you won't be able to change that setting. So do feel free to continue any conversations and don't worry about background noise at your end. But if you do want to communicate with us, the way you would do that is via the questions section. So you'll see under that microphone, there's an icon with a question mark in a speech bubble. And when you click on that, it opens the questions panel, as shown on screen here, and there'll be a text box at the bottom for you to then type a question in and send it through. So what we will do is we'll answer those questions in that same area with a typed response, and often we will use the reply to all feature, so you might see other audience questions and answers at the point they come through. So you'll be able to keep an eye on that throughout the webinar, and we're going to stick around at the end just to make sure we answer as many as possible. Now just underneath that is the area for you to download a handout. So if you want a copy of the presentation slides, we have two versions available. We have the full color digital version, which contains working links to all of our support articles. And we also have a black and white version designed to be printed, so it's more printer friendly, less paper and ink compared to the full color version. And you're very welcome to download one or both of those handouts by clicking on that documents icon and then downloading the PDF files. And there's one final control to be aware of, and that's to switch to full screen. So if you want a closer look at any of the demos I'm showing you, clicking the 4 arrows towards the bottom of the screen there will put you into full screen mode. And then to return back into your usual browser window, you would just click those 4 arrows again. So that's how everything works. Let's now take a look at what we'll cover in the webinar. So we're going to start with an introduction to correcting errors, some examples of what can go wrong and what to consider when it comes to correcting a mistake. We're then going to demonstrate the two main methods of going back to reprocess an earlier period. So we'll start with restoring a backup, and then we're going to take a look at the rollback wizard. Now, if you have been back to reprocess, once you've corrected the values in your payroll, you will need to submit them to HMRC. So we'll explain how FPS adjustments work and how to send them. And then we're going to explore adjusting your employees' payments and other items such as payments to HMRC, pension contributions, or even nominal link entries. And then at the end, I'll run through some of the further support available, and we'll stick around for a little while to make sure that we have answered as many of your questions as we can. So let's get straight on to our introduction. And first of all, we're going to take a quick look through some of the things that could go wrong when it comes to processing a payroll. Now, keep in mind, this is just a few examples. It's by no means an exhaustive list. But the idea here is that whatever goes wrong in your payroll is that there will be a way to correct it. And by following the steps that we'll go through in the webinar today, you should learn the most effective way for you to deal with any mistake that can happen. So examples could include over or underpayment of any particular pay. So it could be over or underpaid wages, overtime bonuses, etc. Perhaps you have a problem with statutory payments. You've entered incorrect dates, you've forgotten to process a statutory payment, or you've paid too much. Maybe you've used the wrong pay date in your payroll and submissions. You need to go back and correct that. Or a wrong NI category or tax code. Could be you've made a mistake with pensions. So maybe someone should have been in the pension scheme, you've got incorrect pension settings, etc. So just a few examples there of things that can go wrong. And what we're going to explore is how you go about putting that right. So what options do you have when you realize you've made a mistake? Well, we have a simple option, so don't discount this one. What you could do, for many types of mistakes is correct the error in your next pay run. So in the example of an over or underpayment, particularly small over or underpayments, you might simply choose to increase or reduce your employees' pay to account for that over or underpayment next time you pay them. So nothing is being changed in your payroll history. You carry forward the correction and you're actually just doing it in the next pay run. And that way you won't need to manually calculate any adjustments and you won't need to submit any adjustments to HMRC. But you do have a bit of a time delay. You will have to wait until the next pay date before that error is rectified. The other approach, and this is what we're going to focus on in the webinar today, is to go back and reprocess your payroll. So reprocessing is going back to the original period where the mistake was made and then entering the corrected pay values. You would also then need to process any other periods between that date and the current pay date so that your payroll record is brought back up to date with the corrected values now shown in the history. Now, when you do this, you'll end up submitting an FPS adjustment once you've completed the correction, which we're going to cover later on. And you will need to make some adjustments to your employees' net wages, HMRC payments, potentially pension payments that you've made to your provider, and nominal link postings. So we'll try and give you some guidance on making that process a bit easier as we go through the webinar today. So if you do decide you want to go back and reprocess, what's the type of stuff you should keep in mind? Well, before you even start making the correction, think to yourself, do I have the original information about what that employee was paid? So do I have a copy of their original pay slip? Do I have the P32 if I've made my payment to HMRC? If you've posted the nominal link, do you know what the nominal link transactions were? And do you have records of any pension submissions that you might have made? And think about what you've done since. So have you processed other periods? Have you processed other pay frequencies? Because keeping in mind, if you're going to go back to an earlier point in time, you will need to bring your payroll back up to date, either for an individual employee, if you use the rollback option, or for everyone on your payroll, if you decide to restore a backup. So you can then think about how you're going to make the correction. So two ways you could do this, which I'm going to show you in the demo. You can either restore or recover a backup, or you can use the rollback wizard. You'll then need to set your date back and enter those corrected values, so known as reprocessing. You're effectively repeating the payroll process for the employees that you're correcting, and you will need to do that for each period from the period you went back to until your payroll records are up to date. And then once you've done all of that, you need to make adjustments to your employees' pay, make sure they've received what they should have received. You may need to make adjustments to HMRC payments. You should submit an FPS adjustment and also think about any pension submissions you may have made. And you would need to go about correcting the pension records with your provider. So quite a lot to keep in mind there, but we'll try and touch on most of this as we go through the demos today. And what we're going to start with is the process for restoring a backup. So it's key that you take backups at various points in your payroll cycle, because it gives you an option of getting your data back if it was ever to be damaged, corrupted, or lost. So you can take your own backups via the backup wizard, and you'll see prompts to do this at the point you update records and each time you exit the program. But you can also recover an automatic backup that the system takes at the point you update records. Now, when you choose to restore a backup, what that's going to do is it's going to override any existing data with the backup data. So effectively, anything that you've done in your payroll program since the point that backup was taken would need to be redone to bring your payroll records up to date. So when you restore a backup, because it's reverting all of your data back to an earlier point in time, it is more suited to recent mistakes. So for example, you've just got to the end of the pay run, had a look at the pay slips and reports that you've printed out, you've then realized there's a mistake, so you might restore back to the point before updating records to correct that there and then. Or you might restore a backup if a mistake affects all or most of your employees, if you want to go back to a certain point in time and then just start again from that point for everyone on your payroll. So we're going to show you both the restore and recover wizard in the next demo. But when it comes to restoring a backup, I just want to mention this because it is quite important. In the restore wizard, you will be offered a number of different file types to restore, which will revert those file types back to the backup data. And when it comes to correcting a mistake, the only files you should ordinarily be restoring are your data files. So this does restore most of your payroll data, so all of the payment information historically, company information, employee records, but it doesn't include things like your FPS data. And the reason why you wouldn't restore your RTI files, your FPS data, when you're correcting a mistake, is because if you've already sent your information to HMRC, you will need to do an FPS adjustment rather than submitting the full payment submission again. Because if you restore your FPS data, it's as if it was never sent. Your payroll will then send the full submission again, so all of the information, including the corrected values, and you'll end up in a position where HMRC thinks that you've submitted double values for that period, and they'll be expecting then a higher payment. So what I want you to take away here is if you restore your own backup to correct a mistake, only select data files. The other files would only generally be selected if you're moving your data to a new location. For example, if you've installed on a new PC, or in specific circumstances when advised by our support team. Right, so let's take a look at this now. I'm going to bring the slides down and we're going to go into a demo. So let's just imagine for this demo that we've just completed our October pay run. We've just printed the pay slips and reports, so we've got a copy of all of that, and we sent the FPS to HMRC. But then on closer inspection, we've looked at the reports and we've realized we've made an error. We should have processed a bonus payment. It was a company-wide bonus for all of our employees, and for some reason that slipped our mind and we've forgotten to do that. So because this is a recent mistake, it was the last pay run processed and it's affecting all of our employees, we've decided to go down the restore route to get us back to that point in time so that we can add on the missing payments, we can produce those reports again, and then we can bring our payroll back up to date. So one way we could do this is by restoring our own backup. So if you take a backup at the point you're updating records, that's the point at which you've entered all your employees' pay, and you've checked that the information looks fine on the reports. And when you save your backups, we would recommend they're saved to a location that you can recover, so maybe cloud storage or a removable disk. And to give you an example of some backups that I've created for this demo, I've been renaming them with the pay date, and I've done that year, month, and then day, so it's in the nice correct order in the list there. And I've marked them as post-update or pre-update. So pre-update I've taken before I update records, and post-update I have taken after. So if I want to go back in time to the point before I updated October, it would be this backup here in my example that I would want to restore. So October pre-update backup, which I've stored in a payroll backups folder. Now to get back to this point, I will need to restore the file through the restore wizard. So I can't open it directly. What I would do instead is I would go to File and then Restore. So that then takes us into the Restore wizard, and it will show you recent backups that have been taken. But because we know exactly which one we want to restore, I would click onto Next, make sure it's only data files that is selected. That's what we've got here. And then I can use the Browse option. I can browse to my Payroll Backups folder. It's already there, it was the last place I backed up to. And then in this list, I can easily see that this is the backup I want to restore. Pre-update backup, and click Open, click Next, and then click Finish. So what then happens is that the backup data overwrites the existing payroll data. So a quick tip before you restore a backup is to make sure that you have an initial backup of the current data, just in case something goes wrong and you want to start again. I'm just going to now log in. So that's my processing date. And that is me back into payroll. And if I can just show you, the last updated column now is reading my September pay date, because we've restored back to the point before we updated records. However, the last FPS date remains at our October pay date, because that was the last FPS that was sent. We don't want to send that again. We're going to do an FPS adjustment to send through any corrections. And last calculated is also showing our October pay date, because that was the last pay run that we saved in Enter Payments. So all we would then need to do is to select the employees that we want to reprocess. So in this case, it would be all of them. If it was missing bonus payments or whatever, we can assign the relevant pay element. Go back into the Enter Payments screen, enter the corrected payments. So add on the bonus to what was there originally. And then you can run a full set of pre-update reports, payslips, payment summaries, pension reports, whatever you need. And then once you've checked and you're happy with them, you would then update your records so that you're back up to date. So I'm not going to do the reprocessing right now, because I'm going to show you that when we cover the rollback wizard. But I'm just going to restore back to the point that we were at originally. So I'm going to go back to my post-update backup, because I want to show you the recover wizard as another way of restoring a backup. So if I just go through the restore wizard again, this time I'm going to restore my most recent backup. That was the post-update backup. That will log me back in. So we are back to as we were, last updated 31st of October. And if I wanted to recover the automatic backup, I can do that by going to the File menu and then Recover. Again, it does prompt you to take a backup now in case something goes wrong and you want to return to this point. So I don't need to, I've already got my up-to-date backup. But with the Recover wizard, it will show you an entry for each period that's been updated in the past. So showing the tax period, pay date, pay frequency, date and time of backup. So from this list of all updates for the current tax year, I can choose which period I want to go back to. So it could again be the last one I processed. I can click Next and then Finish. And this just gives me a way of restoring back, even if I don't have my own backup. And that takes me back to the point where the records were going to be updated. So same as before, last updated is showing the 30th of September. And to enter the corrected values for October, I would simply go in and run my payroll as usual. So that is restoring a backup to get back to an earlier point. And just to be clear once again, when you restore your own backup, if it's to correct a mistake, only choose data files. The other files are generally restored when you're moving your data to a new location, so a new PC, or when instructed by Sage Technical Support. So what we're going to take a look at next is the rollback wizard. And for these demos, I'm going to do a bit of reprocessing as well. So rollback does work differently to restoring a backup. So rather than overwriting your entire payroll database with backup data, it allows you to remove payment history for one or more selected employees. So it is only the employees that you include in the rollback wizard that will have this history removed. And it just means that when it comes to correcting an error, you only need to deal with those specific employees. you would choose which period in the current tax year you want to roll back to. Now, if for some reason you need to make a correction in a previous tax year, you can still use rollback, but you would first need to roll back period 1 in the current tax year. And then you would set your process date into the previous year, and you can roll back to a period in that year. So you have to remove the latest updates first, and if you're going back further in time, set your process date back into that earlier year. So this option is a lot more flexible, and we would suggest you use this if you are needing to reprocess an earlier period, so maybe not the latest payroll that you ran. If you're doing a correction for a mistake affecting just one or some of your employees, or if there's no physical backup available. So maybe you'd switched off the automatic backups, you don't happen to have any of your own backups to hand. So you'll see from the screenshot there, you would choose the period you want to roll back to, and then you can set your date back and reprocess from that point. So let's take a look at that process now. So I'm just going to restore again my latest backup, just to bring me back to where we started off with in this demo. So that's my post-update backup for October. And for our first scenario, we're going to deal with an employee where there's been a mistake made in their statutory payments. So it's an employee currently on maternity leave, but actually returning to work earlier than originally planned. So I originally processed just SMP for the full period, but what I need to go back and change is the SMP payment needs to stop at the point they return to work, and then we need to pay them some salary from the date they returned. So I mentioned you should always have the information to hand about what was originally paid. So if you don't have a copy of the payslip, for example, you might want to run some historical reports before you do a rollback or any kind of correction. So if I just select the employee that I'm going to roll back, before I do the rollback wizard, if you take a look in my payroll links section just here, there's an option of reprinting payslips, which I can click on. And then if I wanted a copy of the original October payslip, I can put a date range in. I can then choose a payslip layout. I've already got one added to my favorites. And this is going to show me what was originally paid to this employee. So they were just getting statutory pay. This was the net pay they received, but I'm going to go back and reprocess this period and pay them some salary instead of some of that maternity pay. So we can export or print a copy of that report. Other things you might want to print are a copy of your P32 if you don't already have it, and any other reports that potentially would need to be used to work out adjustments. So we've got a copy of the payslip, which I'm happy with. I'm now going to go into the rollback wizard. So you can get to this by going to the tasks menu and then down to rollback. It will suggest you take a backup first. Now, I already have an up-to-date backup, but if I didn't, I would take one from here. And then you've got a point to return to should you need to. I would click onto next and confirm that I have selected the right employee. I would click next again, and I would choose the period that I need to go back to. And note that it says here, all updates with a later date will also be removed. So if I'm going back to an earlier period, I will need to reprocess my payroll from that date for each pay date until my payroll is back up to date. But it's only for this one employee, because this is the person that we're rolling back. Now, actually, in this case, I'm only going to roll back month 7, the last period process. So that's what I've selected. I'll click onto next and then finish. You can see there it says process complete. And now the last updated date for this individual has gone back to September Last FPS date is still October, but everyone else is unaffected. So I don't need to reprocess their payments. It's only employee 4. So I'm just going to make a few changes in the employee record. So I'm just going to go into the SMP details and enter the date that they actually returned to work, which was the 9th of October. And you can see that that will cut short the entitlement to the nearest full week. They are returning to work now. And I'm just going to go in and check that we've got their salary details entered, because this employee is paid a salary. So I'm just going to save those salary details, set my process date, go back to the original pay date, and then go into the enter payment screen. So that's put their salary back in. So what they would get for a normal full month. It's reduced their maternity pay up to their return to work date. Because I haven't quite worked a full month, I'm just going to manually adjust the salary amount to pay them for the time that they've worked. And that will then calculate the net pay that they should have received for that month where they'd returned to work early. So check that you're happy with those payments. What you can then do is you can print a pay slip. So this will be the corrected pay slip. I've got them added to my favorites. So we can then compare this pay slip with the historical pay slips we originally printed, and that will show us differences, things like the net pay, pension contributions. Print any other required reports for that employee, and then you would update the records. You might choose to take a new backup at this point, or you might just back up once you've completed the correction. So I'm just going to work through the backup wizard, the update records wizard. And that then tells me that I have updated that one employee and their information is now up to date. So the payroll records have been corrected. I will still need to do an FPS adjustment, which we're going to cover in a few minutes. And we'll need to work out some adjustments so that the employee ends up being paid what they should have. So that was just rolling back a single period. I'm going to do the same process for a different employee, but we're going to go back a little bit, a bit further back in time to make a correction for them. So I have another employee. This particular employee has just hit state retirement age a few months back, actually, back in August for this employee. And although you get messages telling you that the NI category should be changed, for some reason I've ignored that. And looking at the history, I have left them on NI category A for the last 3 months, when in fact they should have been changed to NI category C, as this message is telling me when I go to save the record. So we're going to go back and make a correction for those 3 periods, August, September and October. Before we do that, we could reprint the pay slips, make sure we've got records of the original payments, make sure we've got P32 reports and any other reports that we might find useful. And once we've got all of that, I can go to tasks and then roll back. You might take a backup at this point. And then I'm going to choose the period I want to go back to. So this time, I'm choosing month 5 because my pay date was after the date the employee reached retirement age, or state pension age, I should say. So I've got that selected here. Go to next and then finish. And you can see here the process is complete. So that has removed the payment history from August onwards for employee 3. So last update is now showing the July pay date. And I can then go in. I can make the necessary change. So in this case, it's to the NI category. I'm going to change them to category C. And then once you've done that, we can set our date back to the earliest pay date we're reprocessing, so 31st of August. And then we can enter any corrected values. Now for this employee, it was pretty straightforward. They're getting a standard salary, just a fixed amount that doesn't change each period. So I could look that up on the payslip. Because I've changed the NI category, you can see that the employee is not paying national insurance now when they were originally, and as such, their net pay has increased. So these are the corrected values. Nothing I need to enter differently in this example. I could then print the payslip for this period. So he's got a copy of the corrected values, and I would then update the records. So just for speed in this demo, because the payments haven't changed, I'm just going to update the records for the next couple of periods. So I would change my process date to the next pay date, check I'm happy with the payments, print a new pay slip for that pay date, and then update records. And then I have one remaining period, 31st of October, where I would do exactly the same. So this is why the original pay slips might be useful, particularly if you have variable payments, like overtime hours, bonuses that need to be re-input for any of the periods that you are reprocessing. So payroll records are now up to date. If I check the history for this employee, you can see we're on NI category C. Their net pay has gone up for those periods. And we're just about ready now to submit those changes and then start dealing with any adjustments we need to make to our employees. So that's the rollback wizard, removing the payment history rather than restoring the entire database. Really flexible, easy to use, particularly for earlier periods and for mistakes affecting just a small number of employees. So far we've been focusing on getting our payroll records corrected. Next thing we need to do is we need to report the adjustment to HMRC. And this is where the FPS adjustment, full payment submission adjustment, comes in. And it is something that will show the difference between the original FPS values and the corrected values. So it's not sending the same information again. It's not sending the full pay and deductions, it's just the differences. And this is sent at the point your correction is complete and payroll is up to date. So you can only send an adjustment for the last period submitted. So when I went back to month 5, I couldn't do an FPS adjustment for month 5 or 6. I would wait until month 7, which was the last period I processed, and that will then send the adjustment in relation to all of the corrections I've made. Now, you'll see this in the demo. It will show a liability adjustment figure, which relates to the last FPS sent. But any differences for earlier periods are reflected in the year-to-date values in that submission. So you send it when you complete the submission. It'll show you the adjustment for the current period. The submission itself will contain year-to-date values reflecting the corrections in earlier periods. So let's have a look at this now. Just the 2 employees that I ended up reprocessing in the demo. So employee 3 and employee 4. We could send their adjustments separately. I'm just going to send them at the same time by selecting both of the employee records. FPS adjustment is found in your payroll tasks, so just underneath the full payment submission. So if you try to send a full payment submission, it's going to tell you it can't because it's already been sent for that period. So they've already been included in FPS, and that's correct. We don't want to send the full information again. We're just sending the adjustment, FPS adjustment. And because we're sending it after the original pay date, we do need to choose the reason why this is late. And the reason for any correction is reason code H, that you're making a correction to an earlier submission. So we click OK, and that takes us into the adjustment screen. So this will now look very similar to an FPS. So it shows the gateway registration and company details. And then when you click submit, It lists the employees to be included, and it does show you a liability adjustment figure. So for employee 4, because their pay went up, because they got some salary as well as their statutory pay, the liability adjustment is positive. For employee 3, because we're dealing with national insurance contributions being reduced over that period, the liability adjustment is negative. And remember, there are year-to-date values in this submission reflecting all historical periods that you might have corrected. So I'm going to go ahead and submit this FPS adjustment. You would see the usual progress bar moving across the screen. When it's been successful, you'll see this screen here. So you can then close out of this screen, and you have now reported those changes to HMRC. That just means that when they come to work out your liability, it will reflect the changes that you've just made. So that's an FPS adjustment. It's kind of your final task in payroll once you've corrected your payroll records. But the last thing you'll need to do is to consider any other adjustments you need to make. So for example, adjustments to your employees' pay. If their net pay value has changed as a result of the correction, which I expect it probably would in most cases, but also other items like HMRC payments, pension payments and nominal link. So let's take a look at net pay first. So I'd suggest to correct the net pay, you compare the original pay slip with the corrected pay slip. So on the screen here, you can see the 2 pay slips that we had for our employee that we corrected who returned from maternity leave. So you can see the original net pay, 811, corrected net pay, 1463. Take one from the other, and you know how much extra you then need to pay to the employee. So you can either do that outside of payroll, or if you want to include it on the next pay slip, you can do a post-tax, post-NI payment in this case. In the case of an overpayment, you can arrange to make deductions from your employee. So they can either pay you back direct, or you can agree a deduction amount to take after tax and NI until the overpayment has been paid back. So that would be adjusting your employee's pay when you have reprocessed. For HMRC payments, you would check your original P32 report, which will show you what you originally paid to HMRC, and then the corrected P32 for the periods that you have reprocessed. You would compare the total amount due, and then you can make either additional payments if you owe HMRC some money, or you can deduct any overpayment from the next payment due. So if you do have additional or deductions to make from your HMRC payments, might be worth checking with them as to exactly how they would like you to handle that. But it's comparing the original and corrected P32 report to find your differences. Also check any recovery values. So if your correction has affected maternity, paternity or adoption pay, for example, and the amount recovered has changed, you will need to submit a new EPS to send through the details of that correction. So that's the first point actually on the other adjustments here. So if there has been a change to statutory payments recovered, simply send another EPS, which will contain the corrected year-to-date values. So do that the next time one is due. If you've missed the deadline for a previous tax month, just send it for the next tax month, and that way HMRC can adjust their records. Pensions is a bit of a funny one because it depends on how you report your pension information. So as long as you've got pension reports to enable you to work out what the differences in the pensions should be, you would then follow your provider's process in order to report those differences to them. So that will vary depending on which provider you're using. Or if you are using Pensions Data Exchange with Nest, for example, it'll be included in your next submission. And I thought I'd mention nominal link for anyone using nominal link to post salary information to accounts. If you reprocess an earlier period, you will then be prompted to post the nominal link again, either for those individual employees you rolled back or for all employees if you restored a backup. So there are two ways you can deal with nominal link. You can either post it again, post the corrected values, and then reverse the original journals in accounts. Or you can set your nominal settings to post to file so that it doesn't actually go into your accounts, and make a manual correction in Sage Accounts. So just a little bit of guidance there on nominal link corrections. And with all of those adjustments taken care of, that actually brings us to the end of that presentation. So we've seen there all around mastering mistakes and how to go back and reprocess your payroll. If you are needing further support with this topic or anything else on payroll, I would direct you to our online help centre at sage.co.uk/help, which you can also access by clicking any help icon within Sage 50 Payroll. So a really great resource where you can search our knowledge base and read support guides. If you're interested in our webinars, you can find what's coming up from the webinars tab at the top. You can also watch videos and contact our support team via the help centre if you need a help in hand. We also have access to Sage University at sageu.com. So you can create your own profile there, and then you can log in, find the Sage 50 Payroll training. You can complete our e-learning courses, certification and bite-sized learning. So I'm certain there will be courses on error corrections there, which will take you through simulations and examples. So a couple of great resources there for you to check out after the webinar. So the remaining time is going to be dedicated to Q&A. We're going to continue answering in the Q&A section there. We'll take a look and see if there's any outstanding questions that we can send answers through to. If you'd like a copy of the handouts, they are still available to download. So make sure you grab a copy before you leave. I will shortly go on to mute to help out with the questions. So if you are leaving us now, I'd just like to say a huge thank you for joining me at the webinar today. I hope you found it useful. It's given you some confidence that any mistake that might occur in payroll can always be corrected. Do look out for a follow-up email arriving in about about an hour's time, later this afternoon, and a survey if it pops up when you exit the webinar. If you could spend a moment to complete that and leave us any feedback that you might have, I would really appreciate it. So we're going to take a look at the questions. I'm just going to go on to mute while we do that. And once we've cleared all of that, I'll come back to wrap things up. So I'll speak to you shortly. Okay, so not many questions have come through today. I have seen one which I think Laura is answering, but I can show you this one because we did it in the demo. So the question was, would we not need to send a revised EPS given that we corrected maternity leave in the presentation? Absolutely right to say that, and I can show you that in the demo, and I will do. So we've done our FPS adjustment. For employee 4, there was a change to the EPS figures, as I'm showing you here. So all we would do, next time an EPS is due, so we've just missed the deadline for the October period, but we can send one for November. So we would go into e-submissions, into employer payment summary, choose the option that we're adjusting our payment, and that will then show the revised year-to-date values for the amounts recovered. So they would then be sent through. So the submission would look something like this, exactly the same as a regular EPS. So that has now been successful. And if I just show you my e-submissions log, you can see there was an EPS that I originally sent, which had SMP recovered to date of 4,920. And the latest EPS, which will always supersede the last one sent. So latest submission always trumps any earlier ones. You can see that that has reduced the SMP recovered. So yes, that's how you would deal with the EPS. You would send it again. I would have missed it technically for the October month. So I'll send my EPS for the November tax month. And at that point, they'll know how much I should have reclaimed for the tax year to date. So I hope that clarifies and answers the question for you. Right, so it has been pretty quiet on the questions, and we have reached the end of our allocated time. So I think we are going to wrap things up at that point. Just want to thank you once again for joining us. If you could take a moment to complete our exit survey as you leave, I'd very much appreciate that. Look out for the follow-up email arriving later today. Future webinars coming up. Next week, we've got HR online services, if you're interested in doing online payslips and P60s. And we have a couple of festive specials coming up in December. So links to register will be in the follow-up, or you can go to sage.co.uk/webinars to sign up now. So with that said, we're going to close it down. So thanks once again. Look forward to seeing you at one of our other webinars in the future. So goodbye for now.